All right, we're going to look at yet another version of our test scores app. This was very familiar. We've seen a couple different versions of this, and we're going to see a third different version. Each time it gets a little better, I think. So we have our index file with our script in the main body there. We have a CSS file, very similar to what we've seen so far in all the examples. And we have our testscores.js file. So let's take a look at this. Start out with a use strict, as always. Right here, we are declaring an array to hold the scores that the user enters. So in previous examples, the first time we did this, I think we looked at it with the user could type 3 test scores. The second time we did it, the user could type as many test scores as they wanted. Using this same technique, as long as they didn't type a -1, they could keep adding scores. The difference there was it immediately was doing calculations and updating the web page on the fly. It wasn't actually storing each score separately. This example, we're going to store each score in this array called scores. And then later on, we can use that array to process some of the scores and find the totals in a completely separate loop. So let's take a look at this. Here is our array called scores. It's initialized as an empty array. We start out with a variable called score. Now be careful, score is not the same as scores. The S makes a difference. Score is going to hold an individual score. Scores is holding the array. So we're asking the user to enter one of those individual scores. So we give them the -1 default, and we prompt them to enter a test score. We parse it as an integer, and we store it in that score variable. Okay. And then we test to make sure the score is a valid score. Is it greater than or equal to 0? Is it less than or equal to 100? And if it is, we're adding that score onto the array by using scores and inside scores.length. So when this array starts, its length is 0. So the first time through, scores length is 0. So scores sub 0 is going to be equal to that score. And we just added 1 score onto that array. So now its length is going to be 1. If they don't enter a valid number, obviously they get the error that we saw in the previous examples. So this loop will continue as long as they don't enter -1. And each time it's adding an element on to the end of that array using this line. Once the user enters a -1, we're done adding values onto the end of the array. It's going to come down here, and it's going to check to make sure that the length is greater than 0. That we have some scores in the array. Then we're going to use a for-in loop to add each score to the total. So we looked at for-in loops in the last video. So this is for let I in scores. So it's going to use the counter variable in this example. We're going to use that I, and we're going to take the total, that accumulator variable, and we're going to add score sub 0, then score sub 1, then score sub 2, up to however many scores were in the array. And when it's done, we're going to write the line that prints out that scores. So score sub I, it's going to write a 1 or 0, then a 1, then I will start at 0, but we're always adding 1 to it. So it's going to print the number of the score, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, followed by the score for that particular round. And it will do those in a loop until it's printed each score. And then at the end, because we've added them all to the total, we'll print out the average by taking that total that we calculated using the accumulator variable and dividing it by the length of the array, which is the number of scores. And then we're going to print out that average. So let's run this. Open the default browser. Here it is. Enter a score. I'm going to enter 60, 70, 80, and 90. This time -1, I'm just going to hit enter, and there are the results. As an exercise, I would challenge you to take this example out of the book and run through it, and maybe use your troubleshooting tools to trace through the code execution one line at a time, and watch those 2 loops run.